Liz Ann Thompson, an educator at the University of Minnesota Morris and a PhD candidate at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And you're listening to the Audio Description Narrators of America, Know Your Narrator series, Beyond Your Narrator episode.
Today, we're very pleased to have Brandon Cole. He's an accessibility advocate and consultant for the video game industry. Thanks so much for joining us, Brandon.
Hey, I'm super glad to be here. You did this for me, I'll do it for you.
Here we go. Payback.
The back scratching idea. There you go.
What do you love about audio description, Brandon?
Pretty much everything. I think that's fair to say. There was a time growing up when audio description was a rarity. When I was a kid, I learned about audio description for the very first time from versions of movies that had audio description that I got from the library. The library. And they were all like movies that were older than I was. And there was nothing wrong with that, but it fascinated me back then. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. There's a situation wherein we can know everything that's happening in a movie. I didn't know that was a real thing. Just watching audio description grow up as I have grown up, watching it become more prevalent in movies and TV and everything has been a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I think the real big boom happened, at least for me, the real big boom happened with Netflix and their adoption of audio description and just making it available on all their original titles right away. That's when I finally became what I would say a heavy watcher of content, heavy absorber of content, if you want to put it that way, because there was so much all of a sudden and I could take it in along with everyone else. And it was great. And I love it. It's the method by which I fully absorb content that the side are also absorbing.
Very cool. And like you said, being able to watch the content now with Netflix and so many other streaming services, you've been also sharing some on your Patreon, some reviews of TV shows, and you're also including reviews of the audio description in addition to the show itself.
The actual show, yeah. Yep, that's the point. And that's how I promote. That's how I approach a lot of things. So this might sound like it's off subject, but it's technically not. So there's a movement that myself and my fiance started called the Breakdown Walls movement. And the whole idea, we have a little kitten. That's what you just heard, a little mewling in the background. We have a little kitten now. Her name's Anna. Anyway, there's a movement called the Breakdown Walls movement that we started. And the idea behind it is breaking down the barriers between disabled and non-disabled gamers, streamers, and generally human beings. Just bringing each other together, being nice to each other, just being supportive, lifting each other up, and that sort of thing. And I kind of approach my reviews of content the same way. I want to review the show because everyone can appreciate a good show review. But then, for those who require audio description, I provide some information about that as well. Yeah.
Very cool. And I kind of want to make a comment that is there a difference between a streamer and a human being or a gamer? But that's so
the streamer is the specific category. The human being is the general category. That's why I say gamers, streamers, and generally human beings. But yes, you're right.
Terrible joke on my part. Yeah, attempt at a joke. Anyway. One of the cool things that you mentioned about break down the walls is that there are some walls, maybe systemic walls. I don't think that they're deliberate, but in your efforts that I've seen specifically on social media, as well as your reviews and break down walls in general, it's been bridging a gap between audiences and the entertainment industry, whether the entertainment industry is games or streamers or just connecting with people in general. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. The idea is, hey, guess what? We're all gamers or consumers or watchers or viewers or whatever. We're all in the same place. Whether or not some of us are disabled and some of us are not, we're still all together in the same place doing the same thing, or at least we're trying to do the same thing. And we all want to have the same conversations as one another. We all want to talk about that book we just read, or we want to talk about that show we just watched, or we want to talk about that game we just played. And we want to talk about the same ones as everyone else. Yes, I'm not knocking audio games by any stretch of the imagination. I love audio games, and I respect them for what they are, and I respect the inspiration that they have provided me over the years as well. But that said, we still, we blind gamers especially want to have the same conversations about games that everyone else is having, which is why I fight so hard for accessibility, because that's how that happens in the end. So it is everything I do is trying to bridge some gap somewhere along the line.
Yes. And let's talk a little bit about your consultant work in gaming. I've played The Last of Us 2 recently, and throughout the whole experience, I've been thinking about your efforts and what that must have been like to be
Yeah.
working as a consultant. Can you talk about maybe some of the aha moments that you had with the company?
Well, I guess the best way to start this conversation would be to talk about how it got started with them. And there was a little bit of cleverness on my part, but a little bit of luck as well. So I won't go into the entire history of everything that I've done, but I spoke at the Game Accessibility Conference in 2017, the first ever Game Accessibility Conference. And before I did my speech, one of the guys running the show, Ian Hamilton, also an advocate for accessibility, very, very well known in the industry, he comes up to me, and he did this for everyone apparently. He comes up to me and he makes sure that I'm aware who's in the audience. And I'm pretty sure, like I said, I think he did that for everyone. He's like, okay, so you got representatives from Naughty Dog here, Ubisoft. Well, I latched on to that Naughty Dog thing that he just said. And I was like, oh, okay. So I then went up to speak about accessibility in a general sort of way, like this is the accessibility world that I envision and things like that. This is my experience playing games. This is how I play games now. Accidental accessibility, that being a thing. After a certain point, I started talking about my dreams, my idea of where I want accessibility to go. And one of the things I said was, knowing full well that Naughty Dog was in the audience, I said, what I wouldn't give to play a game like The Last of Us. That was the trigger point, because right there, immediately, so that one of the representatives is in the front row, and you can actually hear her in the recording saying, "Oh, we need to talk to this guy." So lo and behold, after I was done speaking, they did talk to me, and they talked to me still at the conference, but we were like just sitting around talking for about an hour, and that was still kind of general stuff. That was still kind of how would you approach it? Like kind of in general, like kind of what's the word? Testing the waters, as it were, I guess, is probably the way to put that. How would you approach accessibility on The Last of Us? General, broad scope ideas. And so we left the conference, and as far as I knew, believe me, this might come as a shock to you, but as far as I knew, that was that. That was the end of it. I had no idea that a couple weeks later, literally 2 or 3 weeks later, I got an email from the same person I'd been speaking to at the conference, and they said, hey, we would like to fly you down to the studio to talk to the entire team about this accessibility idea you have. And wow. So they did. And so I was flown down to the studio, and I did a conversation with the entire, basically a large portion of the team from every facet of the game's development, designers, audio designers, programmers, you name it. They were all there. And I talked about accessibility. They actually allowed me to demonstrate some games that I could play and how I could play them during that conversation. And basically, I did whatever I could to not only sell them on the idea of accessibility, but to sell them on the idea of me being the guy that they want to work with to make this happen. Like, that I knew what I was talking about, and if you want blind accessibility, I'm your guy. I'm the place to go. And apparently it worked, because for next thing you know, I was being invited back to do more. We started building stuff, we started testing things, and it started coming together.
That's such a great story. I love how the culture that they brought, that they were not only at that accessibility conference, but they initiated reaching out to you. But also, you said clever and luck, but it's also your experience that what works for you and what can be. That there was definitely a coming together there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's the greatest thing. If you want to talk about an aha moment, I think one of the greatest things about the blind accessibility in The Last of Us 2 is that it's not just one feature. You just talked about coming together. Well, that's exactly what the accessibility of The Last of Us 2 does. It's a bunch of features, a whole bunch of features that put together make the game accessible to the blind.
Let's pivot to talk a little bit more about your advocacy of audio description with specifically some of those reviews that we were talking about on your Patreon site.
Yeah.
One of the things that still strikes me is, as you had said several times in this conversation about that being in parity, that everyone can discuss the same thing. It's the water cooler conversations, even if they're on virtual Zoom calls right now during the pandemic, that
Yeah.
we're able
Yeah.
to connect and be able to talk about the same sort of things, that it's removing some of those barriers. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach your reviews of series or movies?
Yeah. So when I'm writing a review for a series or a movie, I focus first on the movie or series that I'm reviewing, because that is the part that everyone can appreciate. Everyone wants to know how good a show is, what they can expect from the show or movie. They want to know how good a piece of content is based on, my opinion. And if they value that opinion, hey, maybe they'll go check it out. So that's the idea. First, the content itself. And then for those who require it, because some of the people that are watching might also be blind, and because some of my audience is blind, and because I'm trying to bring everyone together anyway, and since I have the capacity to do it, since I myself use audio description, I include that as well, providing names of the describers, the descriptive narrators where I can, and providing information about how they did, how I felt about their performance of that particular piece of content. And I do that because that matters to people. People that utilize audio description have favorite narrators, and they have narrators they may not like so much. It's a thing. It's just like with anything, just like with audiobooks, just like with actors. It's just a thing. And so that information is vital, especially to know how someone does in relation to the content. That's another part of it too. There are some narrators, I think, at least for me personally, I think have strengths in certain types of content. Jedediah Barton, I think, is very good at, for instance, the action-heavy type of content. May not be so good at a Disney children's movie. I don't know. I've never heard him try, but just an example.
Sure. And so the performance does matter to you as a consumer of this content, that those nuances that you're describing, that, there's certain anchors that you can latch onto when it comes to naming someone, for example, like Jedediah. It's like, here's something that works for me, and here's something that maybe might not be a fit. And to be able to have that conversation and know that there are opinions, but also there's definite preferences too. It sounds like when it comes to the performance, that includes the performance of the voice talent, but also the writers as well. Yes.
Absolutely, yes. There is a lot to be said for audio description writing, especially in those action-heavy things that I mentioned before. If something is full of things going on at all times, it's hard for anyone to keep track of all that. Even sighted people have trouble keeping track of all that. So to have it be your job to sit down and watch this probably multiple times just to get it right, and just to get all the description in place and keep everything that's important up front, has to be a monumental task, especially in situations like action shows and action movies. There's a lot to be said for writing. There's good writing, there's bad writing. It's all there. I mean, less bad than good, thank goodness, but it's definitely all there.
Let's talk a little more about that writing. What works for you? For example, in those action-heavy audio description projects, what works? What keeps you in the story in a way that would be in parity with sighted people?
What keeps, especially in action things, I like the writers and narrators who aren't afraid to go a little faster if they need to. So, for instance, if a lot is going on and a lot of description needs to be done, I appreciate personally the effort that is taken to make as much description happen as possible. If you're watching a choreographed fight sequence, if the closer we can get, I know it's not always possible because these things happen very quickly, but the closer we can get to the describer pointing out every kick and punch of a choreographed fight, or every swipe of a sword in the choreographed fight, I appreciate it more, because the closer that they get to that, the more into it that I personally am. Every time there is a hit that I can tell happens because the audio of the show or movie, if there's a hit, but whatever the hit wasn't described, it kind of pulls me away a little bit. I'm like, well, what was that? I mean, I know there's other stuff that's happening, but what was that? It could have been someone else entirely that I didn't know about. I don't know. What was that?
Gotcha. So it sticks out more because it's not. Well, where would you love to see audio description headed if you were to have your dream world in the future, knowing what you know right now?
Games. That's the answer. That is the answer right there. And I want to be a part of that too. I don't know to what degree, there's actually a part of me that is considered trying out audio description narration. But that said, games is what I want. I believe it's possible. I believe it could be awesome. I have ideas of how I want it to work, and I just want it. I just want it to happen. It'd be so great, coupled with other features to make games accessible. Having audio description be a part of your experience, oh, I want it.
And it sounds like with all the work that you've done, I mean, previously you had said about the accessibility of some of the games that you've worked on as a consultant and advocate, that it's not just one, that there's multiple aspects to accessibility. It sounds like audio description is a natural growth out of that, yes?
I believe that, yes. I firmly believe that. I mean, one of the biggest pieces of feedback, because I told people when The Last of Us 2 came out, I told people, give me any feedback you have, because I looked at feedback about the game from other blind players as feedback on my work as well. So I said, give me any feedback you have. I will take it in for myself, sure, but I'll also do my best to get it out to the team. And the biggest thing that I got, and I got other things too, but the biggest one, man, oh man, I wish this game had audio description in the cutscenes at least. Man, oh man. That was the biggest thing by far. People still want it. I can't say it's going to happen, but people still want it.
Gotcha. And like you said, you're also a voice talent, so it's a natural progression for you to be able to also do some voicing of the audio description for those cutscenes. Yeah,
I've definitely thought about it, especially lately. Like I feel like me and audio description have gotten closer lately, if that makes any sense. Like I just, because I watch so much content now that has it, and especially lately, I've been like, maybe, possibly, I don't know. Maybe I'd be willing to try it here or there. If I don't know. If the chips fell correctly, maybe I would give it a shot.
it sounds like it, yeah. And with all the growth that seems to be happening with technology and being able to access just the things that you've been able to do for the games that you have worked on, that this seems like it's on its way.
Yeah, I think so. I think there will be. Look at what's already happening. Look at the Ubisoft YouTube channel and their playlist of audio described game trailers. Okay, that's a real thing, and that only means that games themselves are next. Maybe not immediately, but yeah, it's going to happen.
Wow, great example. Brandon, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, is this the part where I do all the plugs and tell them where they can find me, or
just like a 6-prong outlet? Whenever you're ready, plug away.
All right, plugging away. All right. So, if you'd like to learn more about what I do, there's a lot of ways you can do that, and I mean a lot of ways you can do that. You can follow me on Twitter at SuperBlindMan. You can watch my live game streams on Twitch at SuperBlindMan on Twitch, twitch.tv/SuperBlindMan. You can watch my archived game streams on YouTube at youtube.com/SuperBlindMan. You can check out my website, which contains my blog at brendancole.net. You can become a patron if you so choose at patreon.com/SuperBlindMan. If, say, for instance, you'd like to read these reviews we've been talking about lately. You can do that. And you can check out the Breakdown Walls website at www.breakdownwalls.net. You can find a lot of information there. You can join our Discord server. You can check out our Breakdown Walls podcast, one episode of which has an interview with this guy right here on it. So check it out. You'll enjoy it. And that's my plugs.
Very well plugged. Another follow-up question. What's one thing that you feel like our audiences can do to help support a lot of the efforts that you've done, both in advocacy and your consultant work?
Sure. When you have the opportunity to do so, if you try a game and it's not accessible to you, then mention it to the developer. Reach out to the developer on Twitter, via email. Find a way to reach out to the developer. But don't approach it like you're terrible people. How dare you not make this accessible? You're awful. Don't approach it like that. Approach it in a way that will make them want to think about it. Approach it in a way that says, hey, I tried this game. I enjoyed these aspects of it, but it could use a little more work here. If you want to make it accessible to the blind, this is how you do it. And tell them how, give them your idea of how that might happen. And, who knows, maybe it'll happen. Now, the thing that I think everyone needs to remember is accessibility is difficult to patch in post-launch. It is far easier to make a game accessible from the ground up, to design a game around the idea of accessibility, than it is to patch it in later. So your suggestion may not make it into the game you just tried, but that doesn't mean they didn't hear it, and that doesn't mean it won't make it to the next game that they make. So you got to be very forward-thinking to do this work. You got to accept that games might be the way they are, and they might stay that way, but you might be helping with the next wave of things that come out.
Wow, that's really great. That's so well said. I love how reaching out does make a difference, and in how you reach out, the practical aspect. And
Yeah.
how great to know that, instead of a patch, that designing around from the beginning, that is a possibility. And it could take some time. It's not necessarily going to be a flip of a switch. In the same way, I
Exactly.
believe that audio description isn't just, okay, we've got it, check, we're done. That
Yep.
it is it's almost an adaptation of an original work, in the same way that a TV series is a adaptation of a book. That there is a creative element that goes into this work. And I'm imagining the same things happening with the accessibility side of games.
Oh, it absolutely is. I can't stress enough the level of, I can't go into super duper details here, but I can't stress enough how brainstormy each of our sessions were. Like, okay, here's what we need to do. How do we make this happen? And then figuring all that out that was a creative trip in itself. I love it. I love this work.
Oh, it sounds like it, and it's coming through. Thanks for joining us, Brandon.
Not a problem at all. I'm glad to be here.